Section 30 of Coningsby, or the New Generation, by Benjamin Disraeli. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Book 9, Chapter 1. It was Merry Christmas at St. Geneviève. There was a yew log blazing on every hearth in that wide domain, from the hall of the squire to the peasant's roof. The buttery hatch was open for the whole week from noon to sunset. All comers might take their fill, and each carry away as much bold beef, white bread, and jolly ale as a strong man could bear in a basket with one hand. For every woman a red cloak, and a coat of broadcloth for every man. All day long carts laden with fuel and warm raiment were traversing the various districts, distributing comfort and dispensing cheer. For a Christian gentleman of high degree was Eustace Lyle. Within his hall, too, he holds revel, and his beauteous bride welcomes their guests, from her noble parents to the faithful tenants of the house. All classes are mingled in the joyous equality that becomes the season, at once sacred and merry. There are carols for the eventful eve, and mummers for the festive day. The Duke and Duchess and every member of the family had consented this year to keep their Christmas with the newly married couple. Coningsby, too, was there, and all his friends. The party was numerous, gay, hearty, and happy, for they were all united by sympathy. They were planning that Henry Sydney should be appointed Lord of Misrule, or ordained Abbot of Unreason at the least, so successful had been his revival of the mummers, the hobby horse not forgotten. Their host had entrusted to Lord Henry the restoration of many old observances, and the joyous feeling which this celebration of Christmas had diffused throughout an extensive district was a fresh argument in favour of Lord Henry's principle that a mere mechanical mitigation of the material necessities of the humbler classes, a mitigation which must inevitably be limited, can never alone avail sufficiently to ameliorate their condition; that their condition is not merely a knife and fork question, to use the coarse and shallow phrase of the utilitarian school; that a simple satisfaction of the grosser necessities of our nature will not make a happy people; that you must cultivate the heart as well as seek to content the belly; and that the surest means to elevate the character of the people is to appeal to their affections. There is nothing more interesting than to trace predisposition. An indefinite yet strong sympathy with the peasantry of the realm had been one of the characteristic sensibilities of Lord Henry at Eton. Yet a schoolboy, he had busied himself with their pastimes and the details of their cottage economy. As he advanced in life, the horizon of his views expanded with his intelligence and his experience; and the son of one of the noblest of our houses, to whom the delights of life are offered with fatal facility, on the very threshold of his career he devoted his time and thought, labour and life, to one vast and noble purpose, the elevation of the condition of the great body of the people. "I vote for Buckhurst being Lord of Misrule," said Lord Henry. "I will be content with being his gentleman usher." "It shall be put to the vote," said Lord Vere. "No one has a chance against Buckhurst," said Coningsby. "Now, Sir Charles," said Lady Everingham, "your absolute sway is about to commence. And what is your will?" "The first thing must be my formal installation," said Buckhurst. "I vote the Boar's Head be carried in procession thrice round the hall, and Beau shall be the champion to challenge all who may question my right. Duke, you shall be my chief butler, the Duchess my herb woman. She is to walk before me and scatter rosemary. Coningsby shall carry the Boar's Head. Lady Theresa and Lady Everingham shall sing the canticle. Lord Everingham shall be marshal of the lists, and put all in the stocks who are found sober and decorous. Lyle shall be the palmer from the Holy Land, and Vere shall ride the hobby horse. Some must carry cups of hippocras, some lighted tapers; all must join in the chorus." He ceased his instructions, and all hurried away to carry them into effect. Some hastily arrayed themselves in fanciful dresses; the ladies in robes of white with garlands of flowers; some drew pieces of armour from the wall, and decked themselves with helm and hauberk; Others waved ancient banners. They brought in the boar's head on a large silver dish, and Coningsby raised it aloft. They formed into procession, the Duchess distributing rosemary, Buckhurst swaggering with all the majesty of Tamerlane, his mock court irresistibly humorous with their servility, and the sweet voice of Lady Everingham chanting the first verse of the canticle, followed in the second by the rich tones of Lady Theresa. Caput apri defero, redens laudes Domino. The boar's head in hand bring I, with garlands gay and rosemary. I pray you all sing merrily, qui estis in convivio. Caput apri defero, redens laudes Domino. The boar's head, I understand, is the chief service in this land. Look wherever it be fand, servite cum cantico. The procession thrice paraded the hall. Then they stopped, and the Lord of Misrule ascended his throne, and his courtiers formed round him in a circle. Behind him they held the ancient banners, and waved their glittering arms, and placed on a lofty and illuminated pedestal the boar's head covered with garlands. It was a good picture, and the Lord of Misrule sustained his part with untiring energy. He was addressing his court in a pompous rhapsody of merry nonsense, when a servant approached Coningsby and told him that he was wanted without. Our hero retired unperceived. A dispatch had arrived for him from London. Without any prescience of its purpose, he nevertheless broke the seal with a trembling hand. His presence was immediately desired in town. Lord Monmouth was dead. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2. This was a crisis of the life of Coningsby. Yet, like many critical epochs, the person most interested in it was not sufficiently aware of its character. The first feeling which he experienced at the intelligence was sincere affliction. He was fond of his grandfather, had received great kindness from him, and at a period of life when it was most welcome. The neglect and hardships of his early years, instead of leaving a prejudice against one who, by some, might be esteemed their author, had, by their contrast, only rendered Coningsby more keenly sensible of the solicitude and enjoyment which had been lavished on his happy youth. The next impression on his mind was undoubtedly a natural and reasonable speculation on the effect of this bereavement on his fortunes. Lord Monmouth had more than once assured Coningsby that he had provided for him, as became a near relative to whom he was attached, and in a manner which ought to satisfy the wants and wishes of an English gentleman. The allowance which Lord Monmouth had made him, as considerable as usually accorded to the eldest sons of wealthy peers, might justify him in estimating his future patrimony as extremely ample. He was aware, indeed, that at a subsequent period his grandfather had projected for him fortunes of a still more elevated character. He looked to Coningsby as the future representative of an ancient barony, and had been purchasing territory with the view of supporting the title. But Coningsby did not by any means firmly reckon on these views being realised. He had a suspicion that in thwarting the wishes of his grandfather in not becoming a candidate for Darlford, he had at the moment arrested arrangements which, from the tone of Lord Monmouth's communication, he believed were then in progress for that purpose; and he thought it improbable, with his knowledge of his grandfather's habits, that Lord Monmouth had found either time or inclination to resume before his decease the completion of these plans. Indeed, there was a period when, in adopting the course which he pursued with respect to Darlford, Coningsby was well aware that he perilled more than the large fortune which was to accompany the barony. Had not a separation between Lord Monmouth and his wife taken place simultaneously with Coningsby's difference with his grandfather, he was conscious that the consequences might have been even altogether fatal to his prospects, but the absence of her evil influence at such a conjuncture, its permanent removal indeed from the scene, coupled with his fortunate though not formal reconciliation with Lord Monmouth, had long ago banished from his memory all those apprehensions to which he had felt it impossible at the time to shut his eyes. Before he left town for Scotland, he had made a farewell visit to his grandfather, who, though not as cordial as in old days, had been gracious; and Coningsby, during his excursion to the moors and his various visits to the country, had continued at intervals to write to his grandfather, as had been for some years his custom. On the whole, with an indefinite feeling, which, in spite of many a rational effort, did nevertheless haunt his mind, that this great and sudden event might exercise a vast and beneficial influence on his worldly position, Coningsby could not but feel some consolation in the affliction which he sincerely experienced, in the hope that he might at all events now offer to Edith a home worthy of her charms, her virtues, and her love. Although he had not seen her since their hurried yet sweet reconciliation in the gardens of Lady Everingham, Coningsby was never long without indirect intelligence of the incidents of her life; and the correspondence between Lady Everingham and Henry Sydney, while they were at the moors, had apprised him that Lord Beaumanoir's suit had terminated unsuccessfully almost immediately after his brother had quitted London. It was late in the evening when Coningsby arrived in town. He called at once on Lord Eskdale, who was one of Lord Monmouth's executors, and he persuaded Coningsby, whom he saw depressed, to dine with him alone. 'You should not be seen at a club,' said the good natured peer, 'and I remember myself in old days what was the wealth of an Albanian larder.' Lord Eskdale at dinner talked frankly of the disposition of Lord Monmouth's property. He spoke as a matter of course that Coningsby was his grandfather's principal heir. 'I don't know whether you will be happier with a large fortune,' said Lord Eskdale. 'It is a troublesome thing; nobody is satisfied with what you do with it, very often not yourself. To maintain an equable expenditure, not to spend too much on one thing, too little on another, is an art. There must be a harmony, a keeping in disbursement which very few men have. Great wealth varies. The thing to have is about 10,000 a year, and the world to think you have only 5. There is some enjoyment then; one is let alone. But the instant you have a large fortune, duties commence; and then impudent fellows borrow your money, and if you ask them for it again, they go about town saying you are a screw.' Lord Monmouth had died suddenly at his Richmond villa, which latterly he never quitted, at a little supper, with no persons near him but those who were amusing. He suddenly found he could not lift his glass to his lips, and being extremely polite, waited a few minutes before he asked Clotilde, who was singing a sparkling drinking song, to do him that service. When, in accordance with his request, she reached him, it was too late. The ladies shrieked, being frightened. At first they were in despair, but after reflection they evinced some intention of plundering the house. Villebecque, who was absent at the moment, arrived in time, and everybody became orderly and broken hearted. The body had been removed to Monmouth House, where it had been embalmed and laid in state. The funeral was not numerously attended. There was nobody in town. Some distinguished connections, however, came up from the country, though it was a period inconvenient for such movements. After the funeral, the will was to be read in the principal saloon of Monmouth House, one of those gorgeous apartments that had excited the boyish wonder of Coningsby on his first visit to that paternal roof, and now hung in black, adorned with the escutcheon of the deceased peer. The testamentary dispositions of the late lord were still unknown, though the names of his executors had been announced by his family solicitor, in whose custody the will and codicils had always remained. The executors under the will were Lord Eskdale, Mr. Ormsby, and Mr. Rigby. By a subsequent appointment Sidonia had been added. All of these individuals were now present. Coningsby, who had been chief mourner, stood on the right hand of the solicitor, who sat at the end of a long table, round which in groups were ranged all who had attended the funeral, including several of the superior members of the household, among them Monsieur Villebecque. The solicitor rose and explained that though Lord Monmouth had been in the habit of very frequently adding codicils to his will, the original will, however changed or modified, had never been revoked. It was therefore necessary to commence by reading that instrument. So saying, he sat down, and breaking the seals of a large packet, he produced the will of Philip Augustus, Marquess of Monmouth, which had been retained in his custody since its execution. By this will, of the date of 1829, the sum of £10,000 was left to Coningsby, then unknown to his grandfather, the same sum to Mr. Rigby. There was a great number of legacies, none of superior amount, most of them of less. These were chiefly to old male companions and women in various countries. There was an almost inconceivable number of small annuities to faithful servants, decayed actors, and obscure foreigners. The residue of his personal estate was left to 4 gentlemen, 3 of whom had quitted this world before the legator. The bequests therefore had lapsed. The 4th residuary legatee, in whom, according to the terms of the will, all would have consequently centred, was Mr. Rigby. There followed several codicils which did not materially affect the previous disposition, one of them leaving a legacy of £20,000 to the Princess Colonna, until they arrived at the latter part of the year 1832, when a codicil increased the £10,000 left under the will to Coningsby to £50,000. After Coningsby's visit to the Castle in 1836, a very important change occurred in the disposition of Lord Monmouth's estate. The legacy of £50,000 in his favour was revoked, and the same sum left to the Princess Lucretia. A similar amount was bequeathed to Mr. Rigby, and Coningsby was left sole residuary legatee. The marriage led to a considerable modification. An estate of about £9,000 a year, which Lord Monmouth had himself purchased, and was therefore in his own disposition, was left to Coningsby. The legacy to Mr. Rigby was reduced to £20,000, and the whole of his residue left to his issue by Lady Monmouth. In case he died without issue, the estate bequeathed to Coningsby to be taken into account, and the residue then to be divided equally between Lady Monmouth and his grandson. It was under this instrument that Sidonia had been appointed an executor, and to whom Lord Monmouth left, among others, the celebrated picture of the Holy Family by Murillo, as his friend had often admired it. To Lord Eskdale he left all his female miniatures, and to Mr. Ormsby his rare and splendid collection of French novels, and all his wines except his Tokay, which he left with his library to Sir Robert Peel, though this legacy was afterwards revoked in consequence of Sir Robert's conduct about the Irish corporations. The solicitor paused, and begged permission to send for a glass of water. While this was arranging, there was a murmur at the lower part of the room, but little disposition to conversation among those in the vicinity of the lawyer. Coningsby was silent, his brow a little knit. Mr. Rigby was pale and restless, but said nothing. Mr. Ormsby took a pinch of snuff, and offered his box to Lord Eskdale, who was next to him. They exchanged glances, and made some observation about the weather. Sidonia stood apart, with his arms folded. He had not, of course, attended the funeral, nor had he as yet exchanged any recognition with Coningsby. 'Now, gentlemen,' said the solicitor, 'if you please, I will proceed.' They came to the year 1839, the year Coningsby was at Hellingsley. This appeared to be a critical period in the fortunes of Lady Monmouth, while Coningsby's reached to the culminating point. Mr. Rigby was reduced to his original legacy under the will of £10,000. A sum of equal amount was bequeathed to Armand Villebecque in acknowledgment of faithful services. All the dispositions in favour of Lady Monmouth were revoked, and she was limited to her moderate jointure of £3,000 per annum under the marriage settlement, while everything without reserve was left absolutely to Coningsby. A subsequent codicil determined that the £10,000 left to Mr. Rigby should be equally divided between him and Lucian Gay, but as some compensation Lord Monmouth left to the Right Honourable Nicholas Rigby the bust of that gentleman, which he had himself presented to his Lordship, and which, at his desire, had been placed in the vestibule at Coningsby Castle, from the amiable motive that after Lord Monmouth's decease Mr. Rigby might wish, perhaps, to present it to some other friend. Lord Eskdale and Mr. Ormsby took care not to catch the eye of Mr. Rigby. As for Coningsby, he saw nobody. He maintained, during the extraordinary situation in which he was placed, a firm demeanour, but serene and regulated as he appeared to the spectators, his nerves were really strung to a high pitch. There was yet another codicil. It bore the date of June 1840, and was made at Brighton immediately after the separation with Lady Monmouth. It was the sight of this instrument that sustained Rigby at this great emergency. He had a wild conviction that, after all, it must set all right. He felt assured that, as Lady Monmouth had already been disposed of, it must principally refer to the disinheritance of Coningsby, secured by Rigby's well-timed and malignant misrepresentations of what had occurred in Lancashire during the preceding summer. And then to whom could Lord Monmouth leave his money? However he might cut and carve up his fortunes, Rigby, and especially at a moment when he had so served him, must come in for a considerable slice. His prescient mind was right. All the dispositions in favour of my grandson Harry Coningsby were revoked, and he inherited from his grandfather only the interest of the sum of £10,000, which had been originally bequeathed to him in his orphan boyhood. The executors had the power of investing the principal in any way they thought proper for his advancement in life, provided always it was not placed in the capital stock of any manufactory. Coningsby turned pale. He lost his abstracted look. He caught the eye of Rigby. He read the latent malice of that nevertheless anxious countenance. What passed through the mind and being of Coningsby was thought and sensation enough for a year, but it was as the flash that reveals a whole country, yet ceases to be ere one can say it lightens. There was a revelation to him of an inward power that should baffle these conventional calamities, a natural and sacred confidence in his youth and health and knowledge and convictions. Even the recollection of Edith was not unaccompanied with some sustaining associations. At least the mightiest foe to their union was departed. All this was the impression of an instant, simultaneous with the reading of the words of form with which the last testamentary disposition of the Marquess of Monmouth left the sum of £30,000 to Armand Villebecque, and all the rest, residue and remainder of his unentailed property, wheresoever and whatsoever it might be, amounting in value to nearly £1,000,000 sterling, was given, devised, and bequeathed to Flora, commonly called Flora Villebecque, the stepchild of the said Armand Villebecque, but who is my natural daughter, by Marie Estelle Matteau, an actress at the Théâtre Français in the years 1811 to 15, by the name of Stella. Chapter 3. 'This is a crash,' said Coningsby, with a grave rather than agitated countenance, to Sidonia, as his friend came up to greet him, without, however, any expression of condolence. 'This time next year you will not think so,' said Sidonia. Coningsby shrugged his shoulders. 'The principal annoyance of this sort of miscarriage,' said Sidonia, 'is the condolence of the gentle world. I think we may now depart. I am going home to dine. Come and discuss your position. For the present we will not speak of it.' So saying, Sidonia good naturedly got Coningsby out of the room. They walked together to Sidonia's house in Carlton Gardens, neither of them making the slightest allusion to the catastrophe. Sidonia inquiring where he had been, what he had been doing since they last met, and himself conversing in his usual vein, though with a little more feeling in his manner than was his custom. When they had arrived there, Sidonia ordered their dinner instantly, and during the interval between the command and its appearance, he called Coningsby's attention to an old German painting he had just received, its brilliant colouring and quaint costumes. 'Eat, and an appetite will come,' said Sidonia, when he observed Coningsby somewhat reluctant. 'Take some of that Chablis; it will put you right. You will find it delicious. In this way some 20 minutes passed. Their meal was over, and they were alone together. 'I have been thinking all this time of your position,' said Sidonia. 'A sorry one, I fear,' said Coningsby. 'I really cannot see that,' said his friend. 'You have experienced this morning a disappointment, but not a calamity. If you had lost your eye, it would have been a calamity; no combination of circumstances could have given you another. There are really no miseries except natural miseries. Conventional misfortunes are mere illusions. What seems conventionally, in a limited view, a great misfortune, if subsequently viewed in its results, is often the happiest incident in one's life.' 'I hope the day may come when I may feel this.' 'Now is the moment when philosophy is of use. That is to say, now is the moment when you should clearly comprehend the circumstances which surround you. Holiday philosophy is mere idleness. You think, for example, that you have just experienced a great calamity because you have lost the fortune on which you counted?' 'I must say I do.' 'I ask you again, which would you have rather lost, your grandfather's inheritance or your right leg?' 'Most certainly my inheritance.' 'Or your left arm?' 'Still the inheritance.' 'Would you have received the inheritance on condition that your front teeth should be knocked out?' 'No.' 'Would you have given up a year of your life for the fortune trebled?' 'Even at 23 I would have refused the terms.' 'Come, come, Coningsby, the calamity cannot be very great.' 'Why, you have put it in an ingenious point of view; and yet it is not so easy to convince a man that he should be content who has lost everything.' 'You have a great many things at this moment that you separately prefer to the fortune that you have forfeited. How then can you be said to have lost everything?' 'What have I?' said Coningsby, despondingly. 'You have health, youth, good looks, great abilities, considerable knowledge, a fine courage, a lofty spirit, and no contemptible experience. With each of these qualities one might make a fortune. The combination ought to command the highest.' 'You console me,' said Coningsby, with a faint blush and a fainter smile. 'I teach you the truth. That is always solacing. I think you are a most fortunate young man. I should not have thought you more fortunate if you had been your grandfather's heir; perhaps less so. But I wish you to comprehend your position. If you understand it, you will cease to lament.' 'But what should I do?' 'Bring your intelligence to bear on the right object. I make you no offers of fortune, because I know you would not accept them, and indeed I have no wish to see you a lounger in life. If you had inherited a great patrimony, it is possible your natural character and previous culture might have saved you from its paralysing influence. But it is a question, even with you. Now you are free; that is to say, you are free if you are not in debt. A man who has not seen the world, whose fancy is harassed with glittering images of pleasures he has never experienced, cannot live on 300 a year; but you can. You have nothing to haunt your thoughts, or disturb the abstraction of your studies. You have seen the most beautiful women; you have banqueted in palaces; you know what heroes and wits and statesmen are made of; and you can draw on your memory instead of your imagination for all those dazzling and interesting objects that make the inexperienced restless, and are the cause of what are called scrapes. But you can do nothing if you be in debt. You must be free. Before, therefore, we proceed, I must beg you to be frank on this head. If you have any absolute or contingent encumbrances, tell me of them without reserve, and permit me to clear them at once to any amount. You will sensibly oblige me in so doing, because I am interested in watching your career, and if the racers start with a clog, my psychological observations will be imperfect.' 'You are indeed a friend, and had I debts I would ask you to pay them. I have nothing of the kind. My grandfather was so lavish in his allowance to me that I never got into difficulties. Besides, there are horses and things without end which I must sell, and money at Drummond's.' 'That will produce your outfit, whatever the course you adopt. I conceive there are two careers which deserve your consideration. In the first place, there is diplomacy. If you decide upon that, I can assist you. There exist between me and the Minister such relations that I can at once secure you that first step which is so difficult to obtain. After that, much, if not all, depends on yourself. But I could advance you, provided you were capable. You should at least not languish for want of preferment. In an important post, I could throw in your way advantages which would soon permit you to control cabinets. Information commands the world. I doubt not your success, and for such a career, speedy. Let us assume it is a fact. Is it a result satisfactory? Suppose yourself in a dozen years a plenipotentiary at a chief court, or at a critical post, with a red ribbon and the Privy Council in immediate perspective, and after a lengthened career, a pension and a peerage. Would that satisfy you? You don't look excited. I am hardly surprised. In your position it would not satisfy me. A diplomatist is, after all, a phantom. There is a want of nationality about his being. I always look upon diplomatists as the Hebrews of politics, without country, political creeds, popular convictions, that strong reality of existence which pervades the career of an eminent citizen in a free and great country. 'You read my thoughts,' said Coningsby. 'I should be sorry to sever myself from England.' 'There remains then the other, the greater, the nobler career,' said Sidonia, 'which in England may give you all: the bar. I am absolutely persuaded that with the requisite qualifications, and with perseverance, success at the bar is certain. It may be retarded or precipitated by circumstances, but cannot be ultimately effected. You have a right to count with your friends on no lack of opportunities, when you are ripe for them. You appear to me to have all the qualities necessary for the bar, and you may count on that perseverance which is indispensable for the reason I have before mentioned, because it will be sustained by your experience.' 'I have resolved,' said Coningsby. 'I will try for the Great Seal.' Chapter 4